few seconds late, but Josh had to get a hat, so it wasn't like solo flighting on the hat. Thanks, man.
Yeah, it's my official beaver hat.
Perfect. Welcome, everyone. As always, your comments are a crucial part of this event, so please participate with your snarkiest wisdom. We are here to discuss the 5 horsemen of the apocalypse. This is not the AI fan club meeting. So if you're looking for the AI fan club meeting, that's in another LinkedIn room.
Not here.
Not
no
here.
Way.
No. But yeah, so this is the occasional blogs that matter edition. Every now and then someone writes a blog that captures my attention enough that I really want to dig into it, do a little deeper dive as to what prompted this outburst. And Josh wrote a post I'm going to link to. It's also on LinkedIn, but I'm going to do the link his website version. It's called The 5 Horsemen of the Business Apocalypse, a quick guide to the issues that should be keeping every CEO awake at night. So we're going to dig into this post, why Josh wrote it. This was a little bit, it struck me, Josh, as a little bit of a spleen vent, but also one that has been building up over the course of a long time. So I want to get into like all the thinking behind it. And then, we are really going to try to avoid a deep dive into AI. I just wrote a bigger post this week on AI projects on Diginomica, if you really want to talk about that. But I think AI will factor in a little bit. I have a little bit of a rant I want to go on about that, but I'm going to save that because this is really more about like the fact that on some level we've lost our way in terms of what businesses are really needing to focus on in 2024. And I think that's what Josh's post is all about.
Yep.
And Brent says you're disappearing into the background a little bit, but I think you're there, man. I think you're there.
I think, yeah, Josh is disappearing. It's my hat is disappearing. I'm here, but
oh, by the way, folks, Brent's got a fun show coming up right after ours, and they're going to be kicking around why YouTubers are quitting, and I have some opinions on that, Brent. So I'm going to see if I can swing by your show at some point to air that out a little bit. But anyhow, so that's coming up immediately following this broadcast, unless we run long. That's at the top of the hour. So FYI.
Okay. Well, hopefully I won't disappear in my background now. I blurred. So
okay,
be honest.
Brent, let us know if Josh continues to fade into oblivion there. So Josh, let's get into this post a little bit. What brought this post to fruition? Like, you've been stewing on this stuff for a while. So why did this suddenly say, okay, now I got to write this?
Yeah, well, this is the anti-AI corner of the world for at least the moment, and that this was certainly a reaction to the absolute sort of slavish kind of attention that AI was getting from every keynote stage and in every press release. And
well, actually, let's retrace that a little bit, because you had a post, one of your most viral LinkedIn posts of all time, right? Just a few weeks ago on this topic, right? You blew a gasket about AI overdose after a briefing, and you got a lot
I've blown a lot of gaskets about.
Yeah, but that was a big one, right? Because that kind of went viral.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, that was a smaller version of, that was a mini post on LinkedIn. And basically, I said I was just tired of everything being all about AI. And, and I think that, the reaction to that really prompted me to finish this piece, because this one, the 5 Horsemen piece, has been stewing, for a while. And, as I said in the beginning, it really started, as I hit the conference circuit last year, looking for reality. I'm, Diogenes, walking around Athens with a lamp, looking for the one honest man. I'm looking for the truth about what's really keeping people up, or should keep people up at night. And this is what kept coming to me. And I think the thing that really sort of kicked it out of the park for me in a way was, I was actually at Success Factors conference in Las Vegas in October. And I wrote a post about that insane month of too many conferences. But obviously it's a people-centric conference. Everyone's talking about people. And then I blew a good.
Brent's seen you blow enough gaskets that he needs more details on each specific one. But anyway, we'll get to that, Brent.
Right.
Anyway,
okay, we'll get there. So I leave this conference, and as it turns out, on a more personal note, there's a conference about delivering services to developmentally disabled adults. It's a family thing I'm involved in. It's a group called Together for Choice. And I walk into that conference, and they're talking about all these issues, but every single caregiver there starts off by saying, I can't find the people, I can't hire them, I can't train them, I can't retain them. And I just sort of went, like, I leave my tech world and I walk into this thing, and blam. And then, and then I started sort of counting every single experience I had from that moment on. I hit the road, I started traveling, went to Europe. I keep running into this problem of, of human capacity. we're both overdoing it. We have too many people flying, too many people going to the hospital, too many people, for the capacity of the infrastructure we have. And on the other hand, on the supply side, we don't have enough people to run the show. So this just struck me that, and God bless them, the folks, at Success Factors make a big deal about, that they've got AI now that'll help you write a job rec. And that's useful, no doubt, but if you can't fill the job, if you don't have people, if you don't have the ability to, again, to make these competitive offers, it doesn't matter how much AI you've got. So
Right.
That was sort of the trigger. And then I started, refining the list.
Let me just cut in just real quick. So I'm gonna kind of spoil the surprise for people in case you want to know who the 5 horsemen are. We're just going to do them real quick. It's people, data, process, risk management, and spend management. And so Josh is obviously now talking about people, which is the first one. And one thing I'll just say real quickly on that front is I think what I find fascinating about the people one is, well, two things, but one of them is that you just see it across industries, right? Because I end up at a lot of different kinds of shows talking to customers in different industries. And like, I don't care whether it's retail or manufacturing or whatever it is, there's some kind of people or labor issue that's incredibly vexing at the moment, and it has humbled me a little bit because I took a stance some years ago that we were going to have an issue there with automation versus talent. But like, so for example, what we're finding is at the moment, companies can't get enough of either one. So I was expecting these things to come to a head more. I actually had to admit to Vinny that I was wrong about that, which was really hard to admitting to Vinny Merchandani, who's a fellow analyst, that I was wrong about something in an argument with him. That was like a really humbling moment for me. But about 7 years ago, we did a podcast about that because he wrote a book on this topic, and I was going after him pretty good around that. I thought automation was going to like basically like be this sort of job killer. And look, I do think someday that is going to be a problem. And I think there's a time and a place to start talking about what that day will look like, but that day is nowhere soon. And at the moment, companies can't get enough of either one. And that really is interesting, right, Josh? Because no matter what industry you're in, you hear these stories.
Right. And so to sort of encapsulate it already, with the term automation really, or the function of automation is really dependent on getting people, data, process right. You can't do automation unless you got that. You got those. Brent, would you stop with the snarky comments, man?
No, Brent's killing it, man. No, he's right too. I had to suck it up, and it was healthy for me. I mean, I had to seek counseling afterwards, but it was good for me to admit that. But anyhow, so continue.
So no, but this, so I think the point is absolutely well taken, that if we do everything right in the technology side, we can drive more automation. That's exactly what it's all about. The problem is that, that's the theory. The reality is very, very different. And I think, what's fascinating is just the idea that we the total quality management, that the whole, Toyota method, started 50 some years ago. And there's this mistaken idea that you could take that kind of process automation that TQM and other movements created and move it into the software world. And actually, this guy, Michael Cusimano from MIT, wrote a book about Japanese software factories, and said, oh my God, the Japanese are going to take over because they know how to do this stuff. And no, you can't. It turns out that automation of human mediated processes like the ones we work with in the tech world is not that simple, because you've got these massive other problems that boil down to a number of rubrics like change management. It's much easier to fix a factory floor than it is to fix a complex business process. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that promise remains to be fulfilled because the other things need to be fixed.
Yeah, and one other interesting twist is that it turns out that the physical movements involved in robotics are one of the hardest machine learning problems, and so factories have only been able to automate some certain very controlled procedures. Actually, physical movement is really difficult, which is why you don't have robot butlers in your home, and the best you can do is this like little little vacuum thing that runs around and scares your cats. That's as close as we've gotten. No one can make you an espresso or load your dishwasher or anything else. I was just listening to a podcast with some AI expert scientists talking about how we still don't have someone who can load and unload the dishwasher. And so
that's the most dangerous place to go because it's that. Yeah. That's
so physical movements are really difficult, whereas in white collar settings, some of that is controllable because it doesn't involve the physical world. But to your point, there's all this complexity in our processes in the enterprise, and you can't automate complexity.
Yeah,
or it's very, very difficult, right?
Right, and that's on a separate rant, right? And Bonnie exactly 100% correct. General.
I'm just going to read that real quick for our audio people later. Bonnie Duncan Tinder. Hi, Bonnie. Good to see you. Look forward to catching up. Bonnie says, so true on human complexity, Josh, and this is why Gen AI isn't going to magically make implementation of software better in the near term. Funny, because I heard something very different from a couple of vendors this week who told me that AI was going to transform the world and the economy this year. But anyhow, I'm with you, Bonnie. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. And
Brent says, and yet we have cars driving themselves on the highway. Actually, Brent, only in very controlled conditions. And that's, if you look at it, the predictions on autonomous vehicles are years and years and years behind. In fact, Elon Musk promised, I think in 2016, there'd be a car summoned from New York to LA or one or the other, and he's had to postpone that every single year. We're not close. So under only very controlled conditions, and that's because of the difficulty in adapting to the physical environment.
Yeah,
but I don't want to I don't want to spend an hour on that today. So we're not
talking about AI, right?
Yeah. We're trying not to. I mean, we have to touch on it, obviously, but I really don't want that to be the focus. So okay, so getting back to this a little bit, so that people thing kind of crept up on you, but I think eventually what you realized is that there's kind of you picked 5, right? So you kind of felt like there's a number of sort of intersecting preoccupations that CEOs are concerned about.
Yeah. And the next one was data. And data's the easy one because data has always been, the third rail of technology projects, technology implementation. And it's interesting because when I first started really following enterprise software back in the 90s as an analyst, I ran across this big implementation of a bespoke system running on an Oracle database, and they hit the go live switch. It was one of Europe's biggest rental companies, and of course it's one of the hit go live and everything dies, and they spent several weeks remediating this problem that basically was about data migration. They just screwed up the data migration. That was back in the 90s, and for the next 30 years, all I've done is watch these data problems get worse, not better. But now it's more complex because now we don't just need data to run the transactions, to get people to rent cars. We need data for provenance, track and trace. We need data because we've got to watch, the ethical nature of our business. We have to be regulatory compliant. Everything we want to do in the world of enterprises is about analytics and planning. Can't do that without good data. We need to move from the on-premise to the cloud. We got to fix the data problem. I mean, just everything we do ends up hitting this data wall continually. Sovereignty, security.
Well, and I don't want to get too far into AI, but the other piece of it that you've noted and that I totally agree with is that quality data is going to be instrumental to that also. And what we're seeing again and again, like I did a case study on an AI service bot that was a pretty good case study, but that was because they had a very high quality data set that was powering that. And I just tweeted something today about a nightmare customer service bot because it was just thrown out there. The technology was put out there that wasn't supported by proper data and it was going off the rails all over the place. So So data, even though you don't, you get very testy about AI overdose, but you also sort of like the fact that it is at least provoking this data conversation. So,
Well, yeah, that's great because at the end of the day, look, as we keep saying, AI has been around for a long time, and AI is always going to be dependent on the ability to do something based on making improved decision based in theory on some historical information. So you got to always have great data.
garbage
And
in, garbage out, says Bonnie. Quality of
yeah,
software implementation hinges on data quality. Um, hey Dan, I don't want to get too far into this because we really promised we weren't going to do an AI show today, but sorry about the AI thing, trying to relate it to human jobs, replace or augment. I'll just answer this very quickly right now, because this is a much longer discussion. But augment, and the reason for that is that today's generation of AI systems are not cognitive systems. So basically, think of it this way: they can do tasks but not jobs. And so because of that, you can only really augment. Now, if you have the same task being performed by 100 people, then that can essentially sometimes become the equivalent of a certain number of heads who don't have to do that job. But at the moment, this current generation of AI, which will not advance anytime too soon, is not about jobs, it's about tasks. And that's what a lot of people are getting wrong. So anyway, I just want to leave that alone for now because I want to stay focused on data. Josh, can I throw one other thing at you that I think is interesting about the data problem and why I think it keeps CEOs up at night is you've harped for a long time on data silos within the enterprise, but I think the other really huge problem is that if you want to really talk about making a good decision with data in today's environment, you're also thinking about what I think of as like data variety being a key issue, right? So you have external data sources that are important, whether it's weather data or demographic data or other forms of social and data that could have a real-time element. And a lot of that is unstructured data and it's not in your transactional system. And so these data problems, like he said, oh yeah, clean up all your internal data, but you still might make really bad decisions because you don't have a lot of the external data in those systems that you need. So data is a real big conundrum.
Yeah, and you need good partner data, supplier data that's external, and you need this, you need this data for all kinds of reasons. So yeah, it's really, again, it was the second, and that data epiphany was triggered by an ASUG chemicals industry conference, where this customer talked about why they can't upgrade to S/4HANA at the pace that SAP wants. And it was all about having an actual rational, extremely rational approach to a massive data problem that had to be solved first before they did an upgrade, because they were smart enough, all credit to them, to know if they tried to do the upgrade with the crap data, they were going to get a crap result. So that really, banged on me big time. And then
can I throw this into, because I think this is another data element as far as like this, what I just brought up about different types of data. Because Dan Aldridge says, again, Josh, you mentioned ESG as being a pressing business problem. Do you think AI fatigue will eventually lead us back to more ESG dialogue in 2024? And let me just add to that I think that's another element where suddenly now you're thinking, gosh, I really want to have all this carbon data and I want to have all this energy consumption data. And so now you have another element of both opportunity and challenge around data. What do you think of that question on ESG?
No, absolutely. And it's a lot of that data is going to be from outside of your organization. So the quality issue, the governance and control issue, it's a really big problem. And, big data, as Bonnie just said, absolutely is still on the table. Small data is also there as well, because sometimes you're talking about relatively small sets of data, but all the more reason they got to be as clean as hell, or the error rate is going to, be astronomical. So data really, smacked me in the face. And then of course, process is always there. Process is this underlying question of,
by the way, this process is Josh's third horseman. For those of you keeping track of the horsemen, we've now moved on to 3 process. Yeah, we need like a card of process. Right. Okay. Number 3.
Yeah, and like I alluded earlier, that process looks easy if you think of it as in the world of Six Sigma. I mean, oh my God, that's a Jack Welch idea. Jack Welch, who's been, I think, justifiably discredited as the gut management god of the 20th century, really pushed the stuff around as a great idea. In the meantime, built a company that was so bloody siloed. There was truly no synergy, and we've seen the aftermath of that kind of thinking. So you got to fix the process problem. You got to start by when you get to pestilence. Thank you. He's in there somewhere. You got to fix the process problem, and that means you got to fix the silo problem, because the silos, we're banging up against these silos continually. What is ironic about that is that we have a lot of vendors, very solid vendors, who are attacking that problem of silo busting and process remediation. And you can do it in many, many different ways. But the real problem with that is, ultimately who's the champion of that process remediation when the silos are so well established and well entrenched that there's very few C-level execs who have both the vision and the remit and the time and interest to actually look at that. So the visionaries are stuck with process, trying to break down these silos that are so well entrenched. It's almost impossible to fix. So I look at that, and that's another one. Like, okay, AI is nice, but let me actually break these walls down first, because nothing will matter if we're running this extremely siloed organization.
Right, Josh. So let me just ask you about that real quick, because obviously there's sort of like one of the sexiest categories in software right now is sort of this new generation of process mining vendors, or process, whatever they want to call them, process analysis, process automation. Do you think that constitutes a major breakthrough in addressing this, or is just one more way of having this conversation, but then you're still stuck with a difficult problem?
Well, I'm somewhat agnostic as to the many approaches to this, and you've got what I hopefully bearing this term, robotic process automation. RPA is one of them. Obviously, process mining is another one. Obviously, you can do all kinds of things to solve it. The question is, where's the political will and where's the change management to really make it happen? And that's still the underlying problem in the enterprise. And until we fix that, again, almost nothing else matters. It's so damn important. And I'm still looking for that person, that category of leader who really owns that silo busting job. And so far, we don't have a VP of silo busting, and we really need one desperately.
Without necessarily naming a specific company, have you run into situations where you think there are companies that are getting some things done here? Is it like pockets of excellence within certain companies, certain departments, certain areas?
Absolutely.
Like do you have moments where you're like, wow, this company's on the right track? Because I'm worried that this process thing's a little bit of a bog pit. So
the thing I keep looking for is if you will, the process of silo busting and the ownership of that process. And so, I heard from several, again, I think it was at the Success Factors conference, a couple of CHROs who stood up and said, yeah, we are the ones doing this. We're the silo busters. They were both, they were both people-centric businesses, professional service organizations. So, that's super important. I ran into a number of years ago, it was a couple of years ago, a CISO at a major transportation company who was able to do this. I said, how do you get permission? He said, well, I just scare the pants out of everybody with the privacy security thing, and then they fall into line. And I've met other folks who have the ear of the CFO and are able to pull this off. So it's not impossible. It can be done. And the real forward-thinking companies are at least allowing these individuals to do that. But there has to be a bigger system-wide kind of, economy-wide view of doing this, because it's only happening in pockets, as far as I can tell, in terms of the real broad approach to silo busting.
I want to get back briefly, Dan, to your question about ESG as a pressing problem in AI fatigue versus ESG dialogue. I wrote a post in Diginomica a few months ago called Attention Enterprises Generative AI is Sexy, but ESG has teeth. And I took the position that, in fact, the regulatory issues around ESG were going to force spending. Some of that is a wait and see in the U.S. environment, obviously. California has some potent legislation pending. The federal government, it's a little uncertain. I think we're going to see a lot of state to state stuff there, Dan, but I think one thing we can say definitively right now is that any company with a European footprint and some other international areas as well has to put this on their radar screen. And it's actually frustrating when this issue becomes too politicized, although I think you can have a political discussion around it, but actually it's really more of a business discussion at this point, because a lot of it comes down to understanding that, from a fundamental business perspective, tracking this kind of stuff is good for your business. It's good for your reporting. It's good for your energy consumption and management. And Brian Summer, I recommend his ebook that he wrote on this topic. And there's a real book too. I think you get a printed copy also. But he did a pretty comprehensive look at what this sort of next gen ESG vendor might look like. And frankly, I'll throw all the ERP vendors on the bus. They should have been on this a long time ago. They should have been integrating this into how we track and manage all of our corporate systems. And I think you will see that over time. And obviously some of them are making a lot of noise around this right now, but I would say that's great, but you should have been on it a long time ago.
Right. And that's a perfect lead into risk management, right?
Number 4, by the way, for those of you keeping score, this is Josh's fourth horse. Okay, so tell us about that one.
Well, I mean, and that's a perfect example. We've got ESG, we've got all kinds of net new reporting requirements, potentially around carbon footprint reporting, for instance, and that's on top of the extant regulatory reporting in lots of industries. Whether you're making tires, or pharmaceuticals, you're in a highly regulated industry, and you got to manage that risk appropriately. Though when I really thought about particularly this broadcast here, I'm like, what would I say, about it now that's maybe a little fresher? It's not really fresher, but just keeping up with technology is a risk management problem. I think that we've got so much at risk by getting technology wrong, and the bets are the bets are on the table because everyone wants to be a digital enterprise. Everyone wants to have that very sophisticated interaction with customers and partners. They want to have these smooth and efficient supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. And to do that, you got to spend money. You got to disrupt your company. So in a way, tech is its own risk management problem. And shout out to Bonnie. Bonnie's got some interesting data on how to mitigate that risk, because a lot of that risk happens in the implementation phase. But again, if you look at risk management, you go back to all the new things we have to do with data in terms of track and trace and ethics, and we got to have good data for that. That's because we have to use that data for managing risk. And we've got just unbelievably escalating risk. The companies are, ransomware is an enormous problem that no one can afford to have. The issues with ethical supply chains are another one. Who the heck can afford to find out that as we have, this happens in the news all the time, that all of a sudden Starbucks is selling stuff that might not have the proper provenance, for its materials.
Dan says, amen, on ESG should be incorporated into ERP, not just the green ledger and carbon accounting in S/4HANA. Yeah, I don't want to pick on SAP too much there, because SAP has done, I think, a fairly good job amongst the larger vendors, even though, like I said, none of them, I don't think, move fast enough on this. But yeah, the power of this is embedded in basically all the transactional software that you manage. And Dan says, sorry for clogging up the chat, but Dan, see, the thing is, this is an audience driven show. I know this is kind of weird because I know everyone's used to like tuning in and like listening to pundits, but that's not what we do here.
Yeah.
That's not what we do here. I actually interrupt people so we can like have a group conversation. So
Yeah. So
you
keep
came to the
clogging.
right. You came keep clogging up the works, man, because that's how we get smarter. We don't get smarter through like guru syndrome. I'm so sick of this. I went to like a guru webinar this week where two self-congratulatory executives talked about how great AI was and how awesome the world was going to be in the next 12 months. Never mind the fact that we're in the midst of some very disconcerting global conflicts and, you know, facial recognition software is being deployed by a lot of unscrupulous individuals. But no, everything's great. And then at the end, they're like, how did this go? And I was like, well, it would have been nice if you'd ask a few questions. And so here's my tip for executives, which is once you're in an executive role at a company, if you can't handle an open Q&A session, just quit. Just go home. Seriously, go home. Like if you can't handle that, then you don't belong on stage. So add that to your 5 horsemen. Maybe the 6 is like dealing with people. Maybe number 6 is dealing with people like you and me.
Yeah.
So okay, so we have risk management. Does anyone want to?
But don't go away. Don't.
Oh, we still have more to say about risk. Okay.
Well, because I want to riff a little bit on what Dan just said, which is that what accounting in general is shifting, and that's really at the end of the day, how did the whole ERP market start? It started because financial accounting was imperative across the different reporting silos in a company, and the early pioneers of enterprise resource planning really understood that. And I think what we're doing, this comment you made, Dan, and the ones that, the follow-ups to that are really saying, this risk management is the reason why we have enterprise software at the end of the day. It or at least one of the principal reasons. Obviously, you buy this software because you want to make money. You buy this software because you want to count your money. You buy this software because you need to pay people along the way. But you also buy the software because you've got to be able to prove to whoever it is, whether it's financial regulator or the Environmental Protection Agency or the USDA or the FDA, whoever it is, that you're actually compliant. So I think baking this in, as opposed to charging a premium for it, is certainly ultimately what's going to happen. And I
Good one, Bonnie. She thinks I was at Davos because of that last rant. I might as well have been. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that basically was what happened at Davos also. So
was that one of the Davos presentations?
It was not actually, but it might as well have been.
Might as well have been.
Before we actually get to number 5, does anyone in the group chat care to take a guess at what number 5 might be? What is the missing horsemen here? And I'll give you a hint. It's not snarky analysts. Just to review, we have people, data, process, and risk management. There's one more to go. What do you think the big reveal might be? While we're waiting on that, because we do have there's a slight streaming delay. I'll comment also that risk management is obviously like core to AI in particular as well, and that's one reason why the behavior of enterprises is a little bit different than the marketing literature, and why enterprise AI adoption is so radically different than the consumer adoption of Chat GPT, for example. It's all about risk, right? And those of us who have grown up in the enterprise and picked up some gray hair in the enterprise know that inside and out, because we've seen it many times, right, Josh? That those shiny, sexy new technologies require a whole different can of worms in an enterprise context.
Well, and just to pile on a little bit more on this, because it's a favorite topic.
Brent wants pestilence.
Okay, well, here comes some pestilence. And maybe AI is a pestilence for the day, because ironically, one of the more interesting risk management stories that came out in the last couple of years had to do with this company Taulia that actually SAP bought, I think, at the end of 21. And it came out of this scandal around this company called Greensill Capital. And Greensill Capital, which was backed by Credit Suisse and had people like the current prime minister of the UK and the previous prime minister, one of the previous ones as a backer, they actually come up with this new AI driven algorithmic analysis that would allow a lender to actually understand the credit risk for a particular supplier in a global supply chain. And trade finance is a hugely important lubricant, if you will, for the global supply chain. And here's this company, Greensill, says we have a better way to do this, and we're using AI. Isn't this cool? And everybody jumped on the bandwagon. Credit Suisse went. And Credit Suisse went so far as to say, this stuff is so cool, let's collateralize some of these loans and turn it into a separate, financial instrument. We'll sell this collateralized trade finance loan based on this AI that Greensill came up with, and we're going to make a boatload of money. And of course, it turned out the algorithm was bogus. The loans were bad. The collateralized instruments were therefore bad. And the scandal fell apart. And what was fascinating, and this is one of the unintended risks of playing with fire, literally playing with Prometheus fate, is that a lot of small suppliers were stuck holding the bag because this Greensill Capital scam had gotten them some money that suddenly evaporated when these financial instruments went underwater and Credit Suisse walked away. And there was AI about to doom all these small suppliers, and actually this company Taulia, which was really functioning, kind of they function as a broker, if you will, of finance. They stepped up and found other financing, and saved the day, and remediated this huge risk problem that no one could. In that case, you couldn't even see coming, because you assume Credit Suisse, you assume this stellar backing of this particular company made it a good deal. And that thank you, Bonnie. And that to me is one of the problems with risk management, with a sort of an AI twist, is that if we trust this stuff too much, we put it into a black box, and then we find ourselves being burned because it's still not ready for prime time. Okay, rant over.
Right, indeed. And I don't know if I can give the door prize to either Dan or Bonnie, because they both cheated and read your blog. But Dan did post first on the spend management, so this is number 5. So how did spend management make the cut here? What was the deal there?
Well, it really ends up being the buck stops here kind of moment. I mean, at the end of the day, everything we're doing in the first 4 of these is really trying to do a better job of managing money and managing the bottom and top line. And it turns out that that stuff's hard. I mean, if you're not on top of risk, as I just said, your spend management is at risk. If you're not on top of the people problem, if you're not on top of it's all about the Benjamins. Benjamins times a few million. Everything sort of focused down into that moment when it's like, okay, how does a company manage risk, manage people, deal with the data problem, deal with the process problem, and do it in an efficient way? And that turns out to be, in and of itself, a complicated problem. It's, as you know, I'm a big fan of network business models as one way to manage spend and manage risk simultaneously, and I think they come together very nicely. But this is it. This is where it all comes down, is that if you really, if you are not, sitting up at night looking at these 4 factors and seeing their impact on number 5, spend management, then you are really missing the boat. And I think that it's, that's something that's just, keeps coming back to haunt me. Continue.
Dan brings up a good one, because this was part of what was on my mind during our conversation, was like, are there other contenders that for the top 5 that are like, how do other things fit in? Obviously, we kind of rule out technology because no tech can really qualify for the top 5, but because this is sort of business problems that, but technology would fit in to solve some of those problems maybe, but not be like one of the 5. Dan says, could digital business transformation be number 6? Maybe it incorporates the other 5, so it's not a standalone. Interesting question.
Well, and so the answer is yes and yes. I mean, without a doubt, if this, this, the subtitle is the real issues that should be keeping every CEO awake at night, and digital transformation is really there. There isn't a company I've run across in the last 2 years that isn't thinking about that and struggling with it. These five factors are really potential impediments to that. But insofar as it is absolutely essential to to doing business in the world today, you got to figure out how to digitally transform or die. The trick is to do it within the context of these other five, or you're really gonna you're gonna blow it out. Unfortunately, on the risk and spend side, and I think that's again what we see a lot of is digital transformation is failing because they haven't figured out the data side. They don't really have the process remediation nailed because they haven't broken down the silos. They're still struggling with how to with the whole people issue in the company, and then they try to do digital transformation, and you're guaranteed to come up short every time. So
I want to make a little bit of a distinction here and see how this flies. I think the CEO mindset these days, which I think is interesting, is I think there's this sense in pretty much every industry, though some industries are a little more conservative, obviously, than others, but there's this sense that just being operationally efficient, managing costs, and riding out recessionary times is not going to cut it. That you essentially have to be competitive in your industry, which implies some degree of business model change. Whether transformation fits the bill, I wonder a little bit because, like, Josh, I think back to our time at ASIC Tech Connect and talking with customers there. And when we heard feedback from a group of customers we spoke with, there was only one customer and that was able to articulate a broad corporate transformation that was underway in a way that explained how their work fit into the context of that overall transformation. So while I would suspect that a lot of CEOs of companies who had, employees there think about that, to me, it doesn't really count unless everyone in the company can talk about we're part of a ongoing transformation. If they're not, then I don't know if that really counts. That's just more like the CEO trying to do cool stuff to compete. But a transformation to me is a broader imperative. And so few companies seem to have succeeded to the point where, like, I was impressed by that one group of employees because they were able to really explain, this is the transformation going on. And this is how our SAP project fits into this. But you don't run into that very much. At least I don't.
Yeah, well, again, and that's a prescription for failure often. I mean, the very, very best transformations I've seen start with this concept of change management, from the bottom up, and they engage in the stakeholders, and they engage, and they engage the enterprise, because at the end of the day, transformation without change management doesn't work, and change management without engaging your stakeholders doesn't work. And we see a lot of failures. I was struck by something you cited in your AI piece, from, I think it was the IBM study and several other data points that 70 to 80% of these AI projects aren't successful, which is arguably a little less than double the general rate of IT projects. But I think that without a doubt, they're all suffering from the same problem, which is kind of premature transformation, if you will. You got to get this stuff right first, and then transform. You got to get the AI case right, and not just run with it and find out after the fact you got crap data, and therefore you have a crap outcome. I think they're kind of highly correlated.
A few years ago, I was in a retail podcast with a combative host, and it was pretty fun. And he put me in the hot seat and said, please name one successful large scale retail transformation. Please name one, because I've been writing about retail transformation. And I named one. I mean, he was looking for more than one, really, but I named one, which was Target. But Target, even to that point, I had spoken with the CIO, so I knew a little bit about what they had done technically and stuff. But it was interesting because even subsequent to that, Target's had a lot of problems. Target's had some problems post-pandemic. They've had a lot of inventory management stuff that wasn't sorted out at that point that they're still working on. I think they may have made some progress. But the point is, like, I could come up with one, and even that one was debatable. And I think that's just really powerful as far as how difficult these things actually are to pull off.
Yeah, and you could add Walmart to that maybe, because they certainly transformed. Did they,
Right.
was it how, and that's
it's like, are they really a role model though, in the sense that, like, how if you're a smaller company, can you really model your transformation after theirs? I don't think
absolutely not. Yeah.
Dan says 70% of digital transformations fail. McKinsey's been saying that since the 90s without backup. I call BS on that number, because otherwise, why would transformation take that risk? I agree with that, Dan, and I think, like, there's a point where, like, the word failure is really tricky too, in the sense that, I know, for example, in my own career that like apparent failures were really important steps forward for me in retrospect. And I think that's true for a lot of businesses. And so I'm not so sure that concerted efforts like that are a failure. It depends. I mean, obviously, if you have to declare bankruptcy, it is, but I think sometimes we do throw that word around a little bit loosely, but it does illustrate how difficult. I think to me, Dan, what resonates about those stats is more that they require this organizational wide buy-in and leadership buy-in, and how fragile that is, right? Like, where all it takes is some level of executive turnover or some disruption in your industry, and suddenly the stakes have totally changed.
Right. And I think
Bonnie says agree on the high rate of failure. She's heard of successes at LVM brands and Pandora. Yeah, and I think when you get to some, especially in smaller mid-sized organizations, you can find a little more evidence of this. It's really, really hard to produce these in larger examples in larger organizations, especially ones that had big legacy footprints. Like in the retail example, for example, companies that had already deployed massive storefronts across the country that are no longer potentially viable. Those are really, really difficult transformations. VMH says, yeah.
Right. And I think, a lot of this does hinge on the definition of failure. And, back to the, because Dan's asking, why would you take the risk? Well, let's go back to my number 4, risk management. You take the risk in some ways for transformation, because you will literally be out of business without it. You can't meet regulatory requirements. You can't, if you're a regulated industry in like a pharmaceutical, and something's wrong with your material management reporting, the FDA can literally padlock the door right there, then and there. So you'll undertake the risk management task of upgrading to be compliant, regardless of whether it's going to be easy or not. So I think that's in part an answer to that. But I think we don't get me started on on project failure. We'll invite Bonnie on.
Yep, that's a whole other topic. Yep, right. Indeed.
But the history of our industry has been, the history of acceptance of an enormous degree of waste and lost productivity in the pursuit of upgrading to the latest and greatest thing. And it's not always going to be, we'll do it, we'll transform. We don't necessarily, we can't necessarily agree we're going to reap the benefits we intended from that transformation. Sometimes, again, all you're doing is keeping the lights on anyway.
Josh, I want to get back to a comment Bonnie made earlier. In some ways, spend management relates to time. In some ways, that is almost more valuable. Because Bonnie, I want to ask you, did you make it to the very end of Josh's post? Because Josh, your very last sentence in the post, which leads us to the 6 horsemen always lurking in the background: time. Anyone who says time is on their side in a global economy is playing the riskiest game of all. So perhaps she read to the end, or perhaps you all are just in sync there.
Well, Bonnie and I have always had, the mind meld going on.
Evidently.
Yeah. But time, yeah. I mean, that's what's driving sort of the frenetic need to transform in part to answer, Dan again. We are running out of time. It's later than we think in every possible aspect of our lives. And that means the risk is increasing, that if you stand still, you're going to be that shark sinking to the bottom of the ocean. So yeah, time is the factor, and I think we need to have maybe a little empathy, if you will, towards the leadership in this global economy, because they're running, they are running out of time. I would argue, they're being distracted by some of the false prophets, like artificial intelligence, from these 5 basic issues that need to be tackled first. But we are running out of time, and I just the false prophets. One of the things about another example I like to give is of the friend who's a executive with a big financial services company, who was saying, "What do I do about these young bucks in my company? All they want to do is play with AI." And I say, "Well, that's fun, but how often are they using spreadsheets?" And she's like, "Every day." I said,
Yeah.
"Okay, why don't you task some of them with fixing that problem? Because that's the problem that's really going to bite you in the ass. You'll never get to the AI solution with spreadsheet data."
Indeed. Dan says Bonnie's spot on with her comments. Dan, it's not the first or last time Bonnie's been on my show before. You can check out a replay or Raven Intel. Bonnie, you can send the check at any time. Bonnie says that truly what defines a great leader, knowing what problems to solve. We could probably do a show on that as well. I've been thinking a lot about leadership lately in the context of how, to me, like the quality I most admire in a leader, because I think there's a lot of things that you could make the case for. But what I have come to respect the most is people that recognize talent and recognize people who are better than them, and surround themselves with people who are better than them in various ways. They come from very different, diverse, distinct backgrounds, and they're not afraid to be challenged, and they're not afraid to get some muck in their gears as a result of that. And to me, that if I had to pick one thing, that would be that.
Yeah. And I would also say, yeah, good leadership is also about, standing up for some version of what's right. And John, you and I talked about this, was it yesterday? Sometimes, particularly software companies, our industry is full of publicly traded companies that are, a little bit, in my opinion, too, thank you for your leisure. I think a lot of these public companies are too beholden to Wall Street, which itself is too beholden to to short-term profit at the expense of long-term value. And I think one of the great leadership moments I'd like to see a lot more of on a regular basis is the place where the public software company tells Wall Street to go to hell. We're gonna do what's right for the customer and let that value accrue over time. And if the next quarter doesn't meet your fancy, then go buy someone else's stock. But that's just my fantasy. That won't happen, I'm sure, in my lifetime.
Yeah, Dan, that's what Steve Jobs said. Surround yourself with people smarter than you and get out of their way.
I don't think Jobs ever said anybody was smarter than him.
Yeah.
So I no. He wanted smart people, yeah, and diverse and interesting people. But no, Steve Jobs, no one was smarter than Steve Jobs, according to Steve Jobs.
Yeah, but it is interesting though, because like this is one of the dynamics that I see so often in the enterprise field, where you and I will go to an event or whatever, and then afterwards they'll be like, "What did you think of this or that?" And we'll be like, "Well, we like this, but we really didn't like this, and this." And they would have been like, "Gosh, I wish we'd talk with you beforehand." And it's like, this happens so much. And it's like, to me, that's what I meant by that kind of leadership, which is if you have that right kind of leadership where you're not afraid to get those dissenting and strong voices around you, then you don't have that problem as much of like, "Oh, I wish we'd had these conversations before." It's like, then you're having them all the time. And then you don't have to like look back and be like, "Wow, we really screwed up our event this year." You and I were just talking about a vendor that screwed up an event opportunity. And, now it's another year before they can make make good on that. Oh yeah, we should have done that. Um, Brent, this has been, Brent says, this has been a good convo. Next time I need some pestilence, teeth gnashing. It's Friday afternoon. Good stuff, fellas. Brent, great to have you here. And just a reminder, Brent's about to go off.
I mean, we can sort of.
Yeah. What you got? Oh, there's your pestilence, Brent. Just a reminder, Brent's about to go live in 5 minutes on why YouTubers are quitting. I actually have some opinions on that. As I said, I spent a lot of time studying the creative economy. A lot of people don't know that about me, but anyway, so I have some opinions on that. I'll try to swing by, Brent, but I got to wrap things up here. So, yeah, Dan said that's what he said, but he really meant no one is smarter than me. Yeah, of course, for sure. But the point still stands, and I think, Josh, I do want to hit on that a little bit, because if I would call attention to one potential flaw in your post, it would be, if I'm an executive reading that, I'm like, where do I begin?
Right.
So that's a lot. You know what I mean?
Legit comment. And, John, you're the one who always reminds me I should put something positive at the end about how to fix the problem I just got everybody weeping about. But yeah, how do you fix this, right? Where do you start? And honestly, I would start with data. Just start. If you got to pick one place to go fix your data problems. Really dig into that, because everything's going to be the major gating issue. You can't fix the people problem necessarily. That's systemic, to the economy. Your process problem needs good data. Your risk and spend management need good data. So start with data.
Yeah, for sure. And, the other thing I would comment on there is that I wrote a post about a Constellations event, and what was fascinating there was watching all these CXOs. We were having a big collective group AI debate, and it kept on going back to data governance. Everyone, some of the AI cheerleaders want to talk about automagical AI, and everyone's like, but data governance, I need a framework. And I thought it was really interesting that just happened organically. And the one thing I would say that I think we do need to make an adjustment on is, we can't go back to the drawing board with multi-year data cleansing and governance initiatives. I think what we need to do is to take a page from some of these use cases of, take an area where you do have some quality data and do have a good head start, and apply some projects onto that data, whether they're analytics projects or, customer facing app building or whatever it is, like use that data, build momentum, and then forward that momentum into further data projects. Because I think the real trap would be, okay, let's go back into this massive data initiative. And it's like, no, the one thing that's changed now unquestionably is you have to be prepared for your board and your leadership team to come back every few months and ask you, how is this going? And it's not going to be good enough to say, well, we've cleansed this and we've done this and we've you have to be able to say, this is a win that we've stacked up along the way here. But with that caveat, I think sounds like great advice. Start with data.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And I've always been against the data mart, the data warehouse, the data lake, swamp, whatever you want to call it. And I would agree. And if to get a slightly fine tune that, I would say, if you're in a manufacturing product kind of world, then you've got a supply chain problem. Go fix that. You just have it. You have a supply chain. Everyone does. So start with that. Start with, what is the data I need to fix my supply chain problem? And you're going to find out that you're going to need accurate supplier data. You're going to need some much more accurate order data, much more accurate parts, and and et cetera, logistics data. Go start with that, solving that problem, and find the data about it. Yeah, don't boil the ocean. Just fix every piece of data in the enterprise. That'll drive you mad.
Yeah, for sure. And so maybe that comes down to how you start to overcome and deal with these really vexing problems. is to pick something that you can stack up some successes with, and then build that momentum inside your organization that the people can see that benefit accruing to them somehow. The other thing that's on my mind a little bit that I wanted to mention briefly is just on the people side. I think one of the really fascinating things that I'm tracking there and writing about occasionally still is this whole return to office component of that, right? And that, like, people to me also translates back into, like, how are you sourcing talent and how does that work? And to what extent are you providing talent, flexible ways of connecting with your organization? If you're demanding a return to office, what is the premise for that? Why are you doing that? Why is that so important to put people through mind-numbing commutes? Do you have good reasons for that? Have you really looked at that, or are you trying to prop up a flawed real estate footprint that you're trying to rationalize? Like, I think return to office and all that stuff and hybrid work and everything like that is at the core right now of people and talent. So I just wanted to mention that. So
no, and and it's that's its own podcast, because there's a lot to
it is
problem. And ironically, because you and I have talked a lot about community and community building, community development. We both acknowledge that face-to-face events have a huge amount of value, and by extension, face-to-face interaction do as well. So there is something to be said for showing up to a place where you can actually interact, in real life with your peers. And the question is, what is the balance?
Yeah, and what's and what is the balance? And do you need a central office location for that, or are there other ways of facilitating that? I had a really interesting conversation a while back with a smaller services firm, and they did kind of what I sort of advocate, which is they kind of went back to the drawing board and kind of said they could kind of whiteboard it. They didn't have some obligation to, like, okay, we have to all be back at the office. They said, what do we really benefit from a face-to-face context, and how do we do it? And it turns out for them, actually recreational time together is what makes the biggest difference. And so they get together for more culture building stuff that isn't even about work. And what they find is the relationships they form from that inform a lot of the virtual collaboration that they end up doing on a daily basis. I'm not saying that will work for everyone, but I thought that was so interesting with it. They really discovered, like, what's priceless is time where we're just enjoying each other's company and having more informal conversations. Like, that's what we're missing the most. And they found a way to build that back into what they're doing. So I think that's really interesting. So, yeah. But I don't think a lot of companies are being that creative about it. So
the correlation to that is, we talk about having events where there's just a lot of places to sit down and eat and drink and schmooze. And it's that same sort of let's make it easy to socialize with our peers, and let that social interaction be become the foundation for better business interaction. I think
if y'all are interested in that topic, I wrote a fun post on designing enterprise events for Serendipity on Diginomica, and our mutual pal Paul Kachina helped me with that one with some really cool sources. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. Okay, final comments from the audience. Did we cover that adequately for you? I hope you enjoyed that. I really like this Blogs That Matter format, because I think, when someone really puts a lot of thought into something like that, I want to dig into that. So to me, it's one of my favorite things to do, but it requires a really good blog post. So thanks, Josh, for seeding.
My pleasure. It's flattering to be part of it. And yeah, it's certainly fun for me, and fun to have the interactions as well, because getting other people's opinions on this, even if they don't 100% agree, is really good. I am one of those people who wants to have criticism and open dialogue. This is not gospel that come down from the mountain.
Absolutely. Thanks, Stan, for joining. Glad to see you in the chat. It was great to have you. Definitely come back. I try to do these on Friday afternoons when I can, and I have some guests that are not the familiar faces that I have a list of them that I want to get onto the show. Some of them are real ambitious, including someone who won like a Nobel type prize. So I don't know if I'll be able to get these people, but anyhow, but it does take a lot of time for me to get new people organized for these jugular conversations. It's a lot easier for someone like Josh. So anyhow, because Josh knows how I roll and how these things go. So it's a lot easier to be like, hey, Josh, can you come on this Friday? But anyhow, it's been great. Thanks a lot,
Take care.
Josh.